A lot of people dream of creating a masterpiece, a painting, a concerto, something timeless. Robert Kearns, his masterpiece was a windshield wiper. It changed how we drive and it nearly destroyed him. Because when he took his invention to the auto industry, they praised him. They loved him. Until it was time to pay up, and that's when they ghosted him. What followed wasn't a negotiation, it was war. Decades of courtrooms, breakdowns, betrayals, and one man's refusal to be erased. So let's talk about the man who invented the intermittent windshield wiper and paid the ultimate price to prove it was his. Our story today, like so many cars of the time, was built in Detroit, Michigan. Bob wasn't a gearhead. He didn't tinker with engines or dream of race cars. He just drove a modest Ford to his job as an engineering professor at Wayne State University. But while he may not have cared much about cars, he did care about how things work. And weirdly enough, the thing that led him to change the automotive industry, it happened on his wedding night.
Do I even dare ask what happened?
Let's just say, while Bob was a brilliant engineer, he was terrible at opening champagne. The first time I ever popped a bottle, I held it wrong and it sprayed all over myself. I had to change my work uniform, but I walked away unscathed. Bob wasn't so lucky. He launched the cork straight into his left eye. The result was permanent vision loss and a blinking problem. Some wedding gift, huh? But out of that accident came his own Mona Lisa. About 10 years later, in 1963, Bob and his wife were driving their Ford Galaxy through a light rainstorm. The light bouncing off the windshield triggered his old injury, and his eyes started blinking uncontrollably. But what made it even worse for him was the constant back and forth of the windshield wipers. He was distracted by the movement and had a hard time focusing on the road. So his engineering mind went to work. He wondered, what if the windshield wipers could mimic normal intermittent blinking patterns we experience every day without ever noticing it? He called this his blinking eye concept. Wipers that didn't just move, but thought, pausing like a human eye instead of thrashing like a machine. He knew this idea had potential, so he went to work designing a prototype. It worked great, pausing between each wipe of the windshield, much like our eyelids. Bob applied for a patent on his new invention the following year, and it was issued to him in 1967. He started demonstrating it to car manufacturers in Detroit, believing his masterpiece would lead to licensing deals. He started with the Ford Motor Company. Over 2 years, he met with their engineers to present this windshield wiper contraption. He showed them a working model and shared the tech specs. They were seriously impressed. These first meetings with Ford seemed promising. They loved his idea. They requested more info. He met with Ford several times over 2 years. Then suddenly, all communications between Bob and Ford ceased. Kearns didn't put all his eggs in one basket, however, and he had meetings with the other two major car manufacturers in Detroit at the time, Chrysler and General Motors. GM rejected his idea right away, claiming they had engineers that were already working on something similar. After Ford shut Bob out, he met with Chrysler and had several meetings with their engineers. Ultimately, Mr. Kearns couldn't get any of the big three to commit to licensing his windshield wipers. But that didn't mean they didn't love his idea enough to steal it from him. You see, a few years after being wined and dined then forgotten by Ford, he saw their new models roll out. He noticed something odd. The wipers paused, intermittently, just like his. Initially, he was shocked. Then once it set in, he was gutted. He replayed all those meetings in his head, all the times he provided more information that he thought would secure a deal. This wasn't another similar technology. He knew Ford used his designs.
Typical big corporation move. Get all the goods, then refuse to pay.
That smells good. What is that? The beach. What's the name of that perfume you're wearing?
It's Ocean by Calvin Klein.
Calvin Klein? The Jeff, he laughs at me and then he steals my idea.
Exactly. Only this time it wasn't a cologne. It was Bob's Mona Lisa, a multi-million-dollar invention. Once again, Bob's engineering mind went to work, only this time he was formulating his response. He got his hands on Ford's technical specs. He sees that the timing capacitor and motor circuit are nearly identical to what he invented. He confirmed what he knew all along. They stole his idea. Ever the optimist, however, Bob reached out to Ford to set up a meeting, still hoping that this was all a big mix-up or a mistake. No explanation from Ford, no response. Bob realized he was no longer at the negotiating table expecting a contract offer for his tech. He was now at war with a corporate giant. He starts seeing his invention everywhere, in every Ford on the road, and he had nothing to show for it. No money, no recognition. His masterpiece was stolen right out from underneath him. and they slapped a huge Ford emblem on it. Sure, Kearns wanted to get paid for his idea, but more important to him was being recognized as the genius responsible for it. This wasn't just an invention for him. It was his time, it was his pain, it was his name. And Ford stole it from him without ever blinking. So, in 1978, the lawsuit Robert Kearns versus Ford Motor Company began. He hired a legal team, and it seemed like he had an ironclad case against his adversary. By this point, his wiper technology was in millions of vehicles. Little did Bob know that the road in front of him would destroy his marriage, steal his peace, and nearly cost him his sanity. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the beginning of the end for the version of Bob that believed in fair play. His opponent in this lawsuit already had a legal team in place. In fact, they had an entire legal department dedicated to protecting the corporation. For Ford, it wasn't a matter of who was right. All that mattered to them is who had more money and who had more time. If the case dragged on in the courtroom for years, they figured their opponent would eventually lose everything and stop pursuing what he knew was right. It turns out, both sides underestimated who they were up against. This lawsuit war stretched on for a decade. In that time, Bob's legal team fired him because he ran out of money to pay for them, despite the possibility for a huge payday at the end. Bob's initial lawsuit claimed patent infringement and sought damages of $50 per vehicle that used his tech, which totaled over $325 million in total damages. Ford, on the other hand, knew all they had to do was game the system for delays in the trial. They just needed to outlast the little guy. Their strategy was simple: delay, stall, and drown Bob in legal sludge because their coffers would never run dry. After losing his legal team, though, Bob continued the fight. He sequestered himself away in libraries, absorbing everything he could in order to properly represent himself pro se. The judge, like so many other judges, scoffed at the idea of a mere peasant trying to represent themselves in a room full of lawyers. But his arguments and positions were clear, articulate, passionate, and organized. He wasn't formally trained in law, but his ability to understand it was on par with any trained attorney. Now, while this battle was waging, Bob also found his windshield wiper tech in vehicles produced by Chrysler. Enter lawsuit number 2. It was the same tech, the same theft, and the same pattern of refusing credit to its creator. Turns out, the big three are big cheats. Too big to fail, and too good for integrity.
Come on, tell me someone had to pay up.
I got good news. After 12 years of fighting, the federal case against Ford concluded. The jury found that Ford infringed on Bob's patent. The jury awarded him $5 million in damages, which the judge doubled to account for it being a willful act against Mr. Kearns. Ford appealed, but seeing that Bob was ready to get in the cage for another round, they agreed to pay out over $10 million to avoid a jury awarding more in the appeal. On the other front, Chrysler lost as well, and they were ordered to pay him nearly $19 million. On paper, this was a huge win for Bob Kearns. That said, it cost him nearly everything dear to him to fight the good fight. But he won. He got the recognition he deserved as the inventor of the intermittent windshield wiper. His case also changed the way inventors are protected in court. He paved the way for future lawsuits against big tech corporations to go the way of the little guy. Before Apple was ordered to cough up $500 million, before Microsoft got beat down by a tiny software firm, there was Bob Kearns, the guy who taught corporations that a patent is more than just paperwork. Bob Kearns wasn't alone. Turns out, if you invent something great, there's always someone bigger waiting to borrow it. Bob's masterpiece was inspired by a blinking eye. Lonnie Johnson's came from a busted heat pump and a blast of water that soaked his bathroom wall. The result? The Super Soaker, a $1 million toy created by a NASA engineer and nearly stolen by Hasbro.
Hasbro screws up everything they touch. Just look at what they did to Wizards of the Coast.